Thank you, John, and a great welcome and agenda. I wanted to, for many of you, this might be sort of the start of your winding down to the holidays, so we appreciate you all joining during this busy time. What we do want to talk a little bit about is the shared strategic interest in defining what the National Roadway Digital Infrastructure is going to be. I'm going to spend the next 8 minutes or so presenting, followed by Larry and Tim. And what we are hoping to do is to give you a sense of commonality across the different ways we've approached this roadway digital infrastructure puzzle. And through that, we will sort of then pivot to how some of the workshops in 2024 are really advancing different elements of the strategy. As John very correctly said, one of the interesting and humbling things around this is there's a lot of work that's already going on that is part of roadway digital infrastructure. Roadway digital infrastructure exists today. Where do we go next is the question. I do also want to acknowledge several of sort of my team that's been working on that. I see Ted Bailey from STV on, Virginia Lingham, who was JCF now is WSP, she's on, and then some others as well. Laurie Mitkowski and Valerie Schumann and Dean Dieter have all sort of helped build some of the strategy efforts as well. So thank you for all your participation too. Again, as you hear from Ashto and ITS America and me, I would encourage the audience to start looking for commonalities in how we are defining this, what used to be a fairly amorphous description. What is roadway digital infrastructure? We are slowly coalescing around the notion that it is the collective public and private technology assets that create user exchange data and provide services on the transportation system. A key to this definition is it's not just the data architecture, it's more than that. It's all the assets that need to be organized around the roadway to deliver services. And it's not just a single entity, it's the collective public and private assets. So this definition is slowly starting to coalesce in our mind, but also is becoming more consistent with some of the work that you'll see from Ashto and ITS America as well. We also wanted to highlight the evolution that we move from our very successful and important ITS programs that have sort of really, all of us, many of us have sort of had our careers in, which moved from, which built all the infrastructure and the approaches that we see today. And they were largely based on these sort of civil engineering-led centralized device-to-device communication networks and really focused on vehicle mobility and safety. And slowly, as those programs have been evolving to include new capabilities around spectrum technology, edge computing, but also the public-private business models and looking at sort of procurement and partnerships and treating insights as a service. As we evolve our ITS programs, the need for us to take a more broader look beyond individual projects to the completeness of our digital infrastructure becomes critical. This evolution that we share in these slides is something that all of us see and experience, which is we've moved as a transportation ecosystem from being an infrastructure builder to an operator and maintainer to an infrastructure service provider, and we would move towards more of a service manager. And what that has meant is the infrastructure that used to support humans driving in their cars has slowly become, as smartphones came in, to needing to communicate with devices. As we get into 2010s, the post sort of smartphone era, we're starting to see a lot of private sector infrastructure supporting some of these capabilities as well. And in the future, we see a lot more need for machine-readable, seamless data exchange across a lot of devices, across a lot of public and private infrastructures to deliver the growing set of services that we all expect on our transportation system. We've been sharing this equation as a way to make some of this RDI from a concept to something more practical. What we see this RDI really being leveraging our enterprise aspects of our ITS TISMO investments that we've already have in place and being made. So how do we look across an individual project, but think about all that we need to manage and run across our ITS programs, plus the data and the information that needs to be now managed and be managed across our agency to generate insights. And then the complex interplay between the public and private digital infrastructure that really adds that sort of exponent to that equation. And this is something that we thought was a very easy to describe way to say, hey, RDI is more than just data. It's more than the ITS programs, but it's about thinking about the enterprise scale of some of these efforts and thinking moving more from sort of a project-specific deployment to what we all need to accomplish. Just a few quick thoughts as we move forward. This is not just a federal highway thought in the Office of Operations. The idea of digital infrastructure and roadway digital infrastructure has really been emerging across our community, from ITSA, which you'll hear about in a little bit, from AASHTO, who's next on the speaking list. Everybody's been talking about where do we go next with our capabilities. And it's not just within the operations realm. The Office of Infrastructure within Federal Highways with their Better Information Management Program, the JPO with the National ITS Architecture, the Office of Secretary of Transportation with their Systems of Systems Architecture. All of us are looking at where are we going next around some of the digital capabilities of our transportation system. And that's just within the people that we know. If you look a little bit beyond our domains, you see similar efforts happening around electrification, around SAE, around NIST, some of the AI initiatives. There is this just growing sense that this is a renewed and shared strategic interest among all of us. So I have just 3 more slides, but this is the strategy in a nutshell. This is the one-slide version of the strategy, and I'll just walk through this for a second here. Looking at the bottom circle here, those are what we call our foundations. Those are things we need to continue working on, build on the capabilities we have around public policy, around the architecture and data principles, around research, around workforce and business models. And you'll see some of the workshops today really start to get to that. But where do we go around sort of our research? How do we do research in the era where we have to rapidly move from prototyping to deployment and scaling? How do we build in new public policy considerations, be it cybersecurity, be it privacy, be it equity, into our digital infrastructure framework? So these foundations are critical to whatever we do, being interoperable, being equitable, being resilient and sustainable. We see 3 major capabilities that are catalysts to national roadway digital infrastructure, and those are the sort of interconnected rings in the middle, or the vortex, as we call it. And they really come from better information management at the agency, looking at the enterprise data systems, looking at geospatial data harmonization, and really simply collecting data once and using it as needed many, many times across there. So, and then interoperable connectivity, the idea of still filling in those connectivity gaps, leveraging the many sources of connectivity that's out there, and then sharing data seamlessly, not just from where you collect it, but across our ecosystem. So those are the 3 capabilities that drive this. Where we see these getting applied is in the top semicircles, where we have smart communities, the smart cities, the regional traffic management systems, and the efforts that are happening around our communities. What's also really taken hold is the idea of generating a consistent set of services across a prototype transcontinental corridors, looking across an I-80 or an I-10 or an I-35 or an I-69, and sort of saying, here's what we want to consistently deliver and have available as services, and what are the sort of digital infrastructure needs around that. And ultimately, at the topmost circle, it would be something that really relates to how, at a national level, we measure system performance. How do we measure the capabilities of the national transportation system to support economic development, resilience, disasters? And what we really see the consistent national roadway digital infrastructure supporting is all these outcomes that we all hope to achieve that are in the top bar on top. So For each of these, we have several sample priorities. This is a work in progress, and part of what we do in the strategy is to build sort of the communities of practice around each of these foundations, leverage the existing activities that are going on as we move forward. So for foundations, it's really sort of establishing the principles of the next generation roadway digital infrastructure, looking at new collaborative models for research, supporting state DOT data governance efforts that really are critical to making that information useful within an agency, but also not ignoring the workforce. It's something that's really important for us as we look at the infrastructure owner operators. What are the needs of the workforce to address some of the specific IT and DOT interactions? Similarly, if you look across the middle, the vortex, really looking at sort of the better information management strategic roadmap that the Federal Highway Office of Infrastructure is put together, leveraging some of the national data management efforts that are happening through Meyer and some of the more geospatial efforts. The National Transportation Resilience Data Programs really allow us to focus on ensuring that data is managed well within an agency, but really looking at sort of national data exchanges, looking at the ways that we can look at information communication and the connective tissue between all the work that happens at the state and DOT level. And of course, supporting sort of that the NICT deployment plan to advance interoperability, especially through a safety lens. And then the application settings is really looking at how we can leverage all this investment that's already going on through SMART, Retain, and prioritizing interoperability and enterprise data management. The role of sort of traffic signal modernization and looking at some early wins in transcontinental corridors and sort of national capacity around conditions and performance. So again, these priorities are evolving and will continue to evolve in the strategy. But again, to get a sense of that diagram and sort of moving forward with specific actions. Where we are is the idea that this strategy is a work in progress, but TRB 2024 is our important stake in the ground, where we do want to present very specific set of challenges that we can all take on. So where we are today is just a precursor to that event, and will be during our TRB workshop, which Valerie will talk about, walking through the strategy in a little bit more detail, but also highlighting where can we move forward in the near term and what can we make progress on, going back to John's things of moving from strategy development to strategy implementation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Larry to talk a little bit about the AASHTO Moonshot Initiative. I'm just pulling up your slides in a second.